Most people look up at the night sky and see beauty, a glowing moon, a quiet sky, a moment worth capturing with a phone camera. But the Bible often describes the sky in a very different way. In Scripture, the heavens are not just decoration above the earth. They're sometimes a signal, a message, a moment where something happening above is meant to wake people up below. Recently, the idea of a blood moon has captured attention all over the world. Social media fills with pictures and excitement whenever the moon turns red during an eclipse. To many people, it is simply an amazing astronomical event, something rare and beautiful. But for thousands of years, people who studied the Bible noticed something interesting. When Scripture talks about unusual signs in the sky, those moments often appear close to major turning points in history. The prophet Joel wrote words that still echo today. He described a time when the sun would grow dark and the moon would appear like blood before a great and serious day connected to God's plan. Centuries later, similar words appear again in the book of Revelation. That repetition is important. When two parts of the Bible, written hundreds of years apart, describe the same kind of sign, it causes thoughtful readers to pay attention. But there is something even more mysterious connected to those signs. In the book of Revelation, there is a moment that many people overlook, a moment that feels almost strange when you read it carefully. After a sequence of events in heaven, there is suddenly silence. Complete silence. The text describes a period where heaven itself becomes quiet. Imagine that for a moment. The place described as filled with worship, angels, and constant praise suddenly becomes still. No movement, no voices, just silence. That raises an obvious question. Why would heaven go silent? When people read prophecy, they often rush forward to the dramatic parts, the judgments, the disasters, the large events described later in Revelation. But the Bible pauses before those things begin. It pauses with silence. And that silence is not meaningless. According to the text, something very important is happening during that moment. The prayers of believers are rising before God. The image described in Revelation is powerful. It speaks about prayers rising like incense from a golden vessel before the throne of God. That picture suggests something very personal. Long before the world reaches moments of crisis, people have been speaking to God. Quiet prayers, private conversations, faithful devotion happening day after day when no one else was watching. Those prayers do not disappear. Scripture describes them as being remembered. That detail changes how we understand the silence in heaven. It is not an empty pause. It is a moment where everything that was built quietly in the lives of believers becomes visible in eternity. Every prayer, every moment of faithfulness, every time someone chose to trust God, even when life was uncertain. Those moments matter more than people realize, because according to the sequence in Revelation, what follows the silence is a series of events that affect the entire world. But before those events unfold, heaven pauses and acknowledges something first: the relationship people have built with God. That idea connects to another teaching Jesus gave during his ministry. In one of his parables, Jesus described 10 young women waiting for a bridegroom to arrive at night. Each one carried a lamp. At first, everything seemed normal. The bridegroom delayed longer than expected, and the women became tired. They all eventually fell asleep. But at midnight, a shout rang out. The bridegroom was arriving. Suddenly, everyone woke up. But there was a problem. Some of the lamps were running out of oil. 5 of the women had prepared ahead of time and brought extra oil. The other 5 had not. When the moment arrived, it was too late to go back and prepare. The door eventually closed, and the story ends with a warning about being ready before the moment arrives.
For many readers, that parable once felt symbolic and distant, but when you place it beside the prophetic timeline described in Revelation, it begins to carry a deeper meaning. The focus is not on titles, religious labels, or appearances. The focus is on readiness, the condition of the lamp, the presence of oil, the preparation that happened long before midnight arrived. This idea appears again when we look at the life of Daniel. Daniel lived during one of the darkest periods in the history of his people. Jerusalem had been destroyed, the temple was gone. Many people wondered if God had abandoned them completely. Daniel was taken to Babylon as a captive. Everything familiar had disappeared. Yet the Bible shows something remarkable about Daniel's life. Even in a foreign land, surrounded by a completely different culture, he continued his relationship with God. His faith was not based on comfort, it was based on consistency. Daniel prayed every day, not just during emergencies, not only when something dramatic happened. Prayer was part of his life. And that faithfulness was tested in a dramatic way when a law was passed that made prayer illegal. Anyone who prayed to God instead of the king would face punishment. In Daniel's case, that punishment meant being thrown into a den of lions. But Daniel did something that revealed the depth of his faith. He continued praying exactly as he had always done. The Bible specifically says he prayed 3 times a day, just as he had before the law was created. That detail matters. Daniel's devotion was not a reaction to danger. It was something he had built over many years. When the moment of testing arrived, his lamp already had oil, and the story that followed became one of the most famous in the Bible. Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, yet he survived the night. When morning came, he was found alive because God had protected him. Stories like that show a pattern repeated throughout Scripture. Faithfulness in ordinary moments prepares people for extraordinary moments. The world often focuses only on the dramatic scenes, the miracles, the rescues, the powerful events described later in Revelation, but those moments usually come after years of quiet devotion. That's the part many people overlook. The silence in heaven described in Revelation may represent something similar, a moment where heaven acknowledges everything that has been built quietly in the lives of believers before the next stage of history begins to unfold. And when you step back and look at the larger picture, the message becomes deeply personal. The real question is not simply about prophetic timelines or astronomical signs. The real question is about the condition of a person's heart right now. Because the Bible repeatedly reminds readers that the most important preparation happens long before dramatic events appear in the world. And that leads to something hopeful. Even when Scripture talks about warnings, those warnings usually come with an invitation to wake up, an invitation to prepare, an invitation to draw closer to God while the door is still open. And according to the message woven throughout the Bible, that invitation still exists right now.
And that invitation still exists right now. Because if you look carefully at the pattern of biblical prophecy, you begin to see something consistent. Before any major shift in history, before any moment of judgment or dramatic change, there is always a window, a space, a period where people are given time to respond. The blood moon, or any sign in the heavens, is not meant to create panic. It is meant to create awareness. Throughout the Bible, signs were never just about fear. They were signals that something important was unfolding. And signals are given so that people can prepare. When Revelation describes that silence in heaven, it is not presenting a scene of chaos. It is presenting a pause, a deliberate pause, almost like the deep breath taken before something significant begins. And during that pause, the prayers of believers rise before God. That detail should not be rushed past, because it tells us something about how heaven sees faithfulness. The world may overlook quiet obedience.
It may ignore private devotion, but Scripture paints a picture of a God who does not forget. Every prayer whispered in a bedroom, every tear shed in faith, every moment someone chose to trust instead of give up, none of it disappears. It becomes part of a history written beyond what human eyes can see. And this is where the message becomes personal again. The silence in heaven is not just about a future prophetic event, it is also about the kind of life a person is building right now. When the noise of the world fades, when distractions are stripped away, what remains? Is there a relationship with God that has been nurtured over time, or has everything been built on assumptions that there would always be more time later? Jesus' parable of the 10 virgins was not given to scare people. It was given to teach them about readiness. The difference between the wise and the foolish was not intelligence, it was preparation. Both groups expected the bridegroom. Both fell asleep. The difference was what they had done before midnight arrived. That same theme echoes throughout Scripture. Noah prepared the ark long before the rain fell. Joseph stored grain long before the famine began. Daniel prayed long before the decree was signed. Preparation happened in ordinary days, not in the middle of a crisis. And that is why this conversation about Bible prophecy and end times is not just about watching headlines or interpreting signs in the heavens. It is about building something steady within your own life. Because according to Revelation, after the silence, events begin to move quickly. Trumpets sound, sequences unfold, momentum builds, and in one powerful moment, an angel declares that there will be no more delay. Those words carry weight. No more delay means the window eventually closes. The season of warning transitions into the season of fulfillment. And that is why the Bible repeatedly emphasizes today. Not someday, not when things calm down, not when life feels more convenient. Today. The question is not whether God is faithful. Scripture makes that clear across generations. The question is whether we respond while the invitation is still open. And here is something important to understand. Responding does not mean trying to decode every detail of prophecy. It does not mean obsessing over timelines or predicting exact dates. The Bible itself warns against that kind of speculation. Instead, responding means anchoring your life to something unchanging. When Joshua stood at the edge of the Jordan River, he faced uncertainty on a scale most of us cannot imagine. Moses was gone, the wilderness years were over, a new chapter was beginning. And what did God tell him? He did not hand him a detailed battle strategy first. He told him to stay rooted in the Word, to meditate on it day and night, to let it guide every step. That instruction matters. Because when the ground feels unstable, the solution is not to move faster in panic, it is to stand firm on something solid. The same truth applies in any generation that senses acceleration. When events seem to move quickly, when the world feels unsettled, when people talk about signs and prophetic patterns, the temptation is either to dismiss everything or become overwhelmed. But Scripture offers a third way. Be still and know that He is God. Those words from the Psalms were written during a time of national crisis. The earth felt like it was shaking. Mountains were described as falling into the sea. It was not a peaceful setting. Yet in that chaos, the command was not to panic. It was not to calculate endlessly. It was to know. To know that God remains in control. To know that His promises do not expire when circumstances shift. To know that His faithfulness is not just something from the past, but something active right now. And this is where the message returns to the heart again. The blood moon, the silence in heaven, the unfolding of revelation, all of it ultimately points toward a relationship. Not just information, not just prediction, relationship. Because the Bible consistently shows that God's desire is not destruction, but redemption. Warnings are given so people can turn. Invitations are extended so people can respond freely. If you have been watching events in the world and feeling a sense that something is changing, you are not alone. Many people sense that history moves in seasons. But the deeper question is not about global events, it is about your personal response. Have you built your life on something eternal, or are you relying on systems and structures that shift without warning? The silence described in Revelation is a reminder that there comes a moment when what is hidden becomes visible. What was built quietly matters, and what was ignored eventually becomes urgent. But the invitation is still here. Right now, there is still space to pray, still space to return, still space to begin again. The door described in Jesus' parable had not closed until the bridegroom arrived, and until that moment, preparation was possible. That is why this message is not about fear, it is about awareness. It is about choosing to take spiritual life seriously before circumstances force the issue. Because when Scripture speaks about end times, it does not end in chaos, it ends in restoration. It ends in a kingdom that cannot be shaken. It ends with God dwelling with His people. And the path toward that hope begins with something simple and deeply personal: surrender. Not surrender to panic, not surrender to speculation, but surrender to the one who holds the timeline itself. And if that thought has been stirring something in you while you listen, if this feels less like information and more like recognition, then perhaps this is the moment the invitation becomes real for you. Because the most important decision is not about interpreting a sign in the sky. It is about responding to the voice that has been speaking to your heart long before you ever looked up at the moon.
The wind kept moving through the quiet valleys as the strange signs in the sky slowly faded. People everywhere were still talking about the night of the blood moon, trying to understand what it meant. Some were afraid, others were curious, and many were simply watching the world around them more closely than ever before. In the days that followed, it felt as if time itself had slowed down. News reports spoke about unusual weather patterns, strange lights in the sky, and growing tension between nations. Whether these events were connected or not, many people began remembering the ancient writings of Enoch and the prophetic visions recorded by John of Patmos. As the second week passed, conversations about prophecy and the end times started spreading across social media, churches, and even ordinary homes. Some scholars pointed to passages from the book of Revelation, explaining that signs in the heavens have always captured human attention. Others mentioned the mysterious writings found in the book of Enoch, where celestial events were often described as warnings meant to wake people up spiritually. Whether someone believed these texts literally or saw them as symbolic messages, the discussions were growing louder. By the 15th day after the blood moon, the world seemed to be watching every headline more carefully. Small conflicts between nations began appearing in the news, and economic worries made people uneasy. History shows that times of uncertainty often push people to search for meaning. Some pastors reminded their communities that prophecy is not only about fear, but also about reflection and change. They spoke about the visions described by John of Patmos, where difficult times were also followed by hope and renewal. Meanwhile, researchers and historians explained that blood moons themselves are natural lunar eclipses, something that has happened many times throughout history. Yet what made this moment different was the global conversation surrounding it. Millions of people were connecting ancient writings with modern events, wondering if the world was moving towards something significant. It created a strange mixture of science, faith, and curiosity. During these days, people began paying more attention to their daily lives. Families spent more time talking about the future. Religious leaders encouraged prayer, reflection, and kindness toward others. Even those who were not religious started asking deeper questions about purpose and direction. The old stories connected to Enoch reminded many listeners that humanity has always searched the skies for meaning. As the 20th day approached, one thing became clear. The blood moon had done more than color the sky red for a single night. It had sparked a worldwide conversation about prophecy, history, and the possibility that ancient warnings still hold meaning today. And according to the interpretations some people were sharing online, the next 10 days might be the most important part of the entire 30-day period.
By the 20th day after the blood moon, the atmosphere across the world felt different. The red glow that once filled the sky was long gone, yet the memory of that night continued to shape conversations everywhere. People were still searching for answers, watching the news, studying ancient writings, and asking whether the strange timing of global events meant anything at all. Many viewers who had followed the discussion from the beginning started returning again to the old prophetic texts connected to Enoch and the visions described by John of Patmos. These writings, although centuries old, suddenly felt very relevant to modern audiences. During these days, discussions about the meaning of celestial signs became more intense. Scholars and teachers explained that in the Book of Enoch, heavenly events were often described as signals meant to remind humanity that the world is part of a larger spiritual story. In a similar way, the Book of Revelation also speaks about dramatic signs appearing in the heavens during important moments in history. For many believers, these similarities between the two texts felt surprising. It was as if two voices from different centuries were pointing toward the same message, that people should pay attention not only to what happens on earth, but also to what appears in the sky. Around the 22nd day, online searches about biblical prophecy increased rapidly. Videos discussing the blood moon prophecy, end-time signs, and ancient scriptures started trending. Some people believed these discussions were simply part of the normal curiosity that follows rare astronomical events. Others felt that the growing interest itself was meaningful, almost like a global awakening where people were suddenly thinking more seriously about spiritual matters. Churches reported more visitors, podcasts about prophecy gained new listeners, and social media was filled with debates about what the next few days could bring. At the same time, world events continued moving forward. Economic concerns, political disagreements, and international tensions were already part of the global landscape, but now many observers were connecting those headlines to prophetic interpretations. Historians reminded audiences that throughout history, every generation has tried to interpret its own events through prophecy. Yet what made this moment unique was how quickly information traveled. Within seconds, a headline in one country could spark discussion across the entire world. By the 24th day, a new wave of interest focused on the symbolic meaning of the number 30. Some teachers pointed out that in biblical narratives, periods of 30 days often represent a time of preparation or transition. Whether someone believed this interpretation or not, it added another layer to the ongoing conversation. People began wondering if the final days of this 30-day window might reveal something unexpected or simply offer an opportunity for reflection. During this period, many spiritual leaders encouraged people to step back from fear and instead focus on wisdom and awareness. They explained that ancient prophets, including Enoch, often used powerful imagery to inspire people to think about their choices and their relationship with others. The message was not always about predicting exact events, but about encouraging humanity to live more responsibly and compassionately. As the 25th day approached, anticipation slowly began building again. Some people believed the most important part of the 30-day period was still ahead. Others thought the true impact of the blood moon had already happened by bringing global attention back to ancient wisdom and spiritual questions. Either way, the conversation was far from over.
According to many interpretations being shared online, the final 5 days could carry a deeper meaning, days that might reveal whether this moment would fade into history as another interesting celestial event or remain remembered as the start of a much larger discussion about prophecy, faith, and the future of the world. By the 26th day after the blood moon, something subtle began to change in the global conversation. At first, the excitement had been intense. Videos, articles, and endless discussions about prophecy, heavenly signs, and the meaning of the red moon filled the internet. But now the tone was shifting. Instead of only asking what might happen next, many people were beginning to reflect on what they had already learned during these weeks. The blood moon acted like a spark, pushing people to reopen ancient texts and think more deeply about spiritual questions they had not considered for a long time. Across different communities, people continued studying the writings connected to Enoch. In the ancient traditions surrounding him, the heavens were never described as random or meaningless. They were portrayed as a kind of cosmic clock, where signs in the sky reminded humanity that history unfolds within a larger divine story. These ideas also echoed in the visions written by John of Patmos, whose descriptions in the Book of Revelation have fascinated readers for centuries. For many viewers, the similarities between these writings created a sense that the past and the present were somehow connected. Around the 27th day, a quieter type of curiosity began spreading. Instead of focusing only on dramatic interpretations, people started asking more personal questions. What do these ancient warnings really mean for everyday life? Why did prophets speak about readiness, wisdom, and awareness more than specific dates? These questions slowly changed the direction of the conversation. The story was no longer only about a blood moon in the sky. It was about what people choose to do after seeing it. During this time, teachers and researchers pointed out something interesting about the rhythm of prophecy in the Bible. Many prophetic moments include a pause before the next major event. In the narrative described by John of Patmos, there is a mysterious moment described as silence in heaven before the next series of events unfolds. For centuries, readers have wondered what that silence represents. Some interpret it as a moment of reflection. Others see it as a symbolic pause before a new chapter begins. Whatever the meaning, the idea of a quiet moment before something important happens resonated with many viewers during these final days of the 30-day period.
By the 28th day, the initial shock of the blood moon had faded, but the curiosity remained. Conversations online became more thoughtful. Some people shared personal stories about how the event had pushed them to reconnect with faith, prayer, or spiritual reflection. Others approached the topic from a historical perspective, comparing modern reactions to how ancient civilizations reacted to unusual events in the sky. In every direction, the same pattern appeared: humanity trying to understand its place in a universe filled with mysteries. As the 29th day approached, anticipation slowly returned. The number 30 had become symbolic during this entire discussion. Many people wondered if the final day would reveal something meaningful, or if the true significance of the blood moon was the journey itself, the questions it created, the scriptures it brought back into conversation, and the renewed interest in ancient prophecy. The writings associated with Enoch often emphasize awareness and understanding rather than fear, reminding readers that signs in the heavens are meant to inspire wisdom rather than panic. And now, with only 1 day remaining in this 30-day window, the world seemed to be holding its breath in a quiet way. Not because everyone expected something dramatic to happen, but because the past month had reminded millions of people of something easy to forget in the noise of everyday life: that humanity has always looked to the sky for meaning. The final day was approaching, and with it came the question that had been building since the night of the blood moon. Was this simply a rare moment of cosmic beauty, or had it opened the door to a deeper reflection about faith, prophecy, and the direction of the world? The 30th day finally arrived, and by this point, the mood around the blood moon had changed in a surprising way. At the beginning of the month, people were filled with excitement and even a little fear. Social media was flooded with theories about prophecy, celestial signs, and what the red moon might mean. But now, 30 days later, the loud speculation had slowed down. What remained was something quieter and deeper, a sense of reflection. Many people had spent the past weeks reading ancient scriptures, studying prophecy, and thinking about the meaning behind signs in the heavens. Some of those conversations naturally returned to the visions written in the book of Revelation. The imagery described by John of Patmos has always captured the imagination of readers. His descriptions of cosmic signs, silence in heaven, and moments of divine pause created a powerful picture of history moving toward a larger purpose. For centuries, believers have debated what those symbols mean. Yet one thing many interpreters agree on is that these passages are not written to create panic. They are meant to awaken awareness and encourage people to live with wisdom and faith. At the same time, interest in the ancient traditions connected to Enoch continued growing. In the stories associated with him, the heavens are portrayed almost like a living calendar. The sun, the moon, and the stars follow patterns that remind humanity that time itself has meaning. To ancient readers, the sky was not simply decoration above the earth. It was a reminder that history unfolds under a greater design. When modern audiences rediscovered these writings during the month after the blood moon, many began to see them with fresh eyes. What surprised many observers during these 30 days was how personal the conversation became. Instead of focusing only on predictions, people started talking about preparation in a different sense. Preparation not as fear, but as awareness. In several biblical teachings, readiness is connected to living faithfully in everyday life, showing kindness, seeking truth, and staying spiritually awake in a world that often moves too quickly to notice deeper questions. This idea is beautifully illustrated in one of the most famous teachings of Jesus, the parable of the 10 virgins in the Gospel of Matthew. In that story, some were prepared when the moment arrived, and others were not. The lesson was not about predicting an exact time. Instead, it was about remaining ready in heart and spirit. As viewers reflected on the month following the blood moon, many realized that this message was more relevant than ever. Looking back over the 30 days, it became clear that the true impact of the blood moon was not the color of the sky that night. It was the conversation that followed. Millions of people around the world opened ancient scriptures again. They rediscovered prophetic writings. They compared the words of different prophets and wondered how those messages might apply to the world today. In the end, the blood moon served as a reminder of something humanity has always done. From the earliest civilizations to the modern digital age, people have looked up at the sky and asked the same question: is there a deeper story unfolding beyond what we can see? The prophets believed there was. The scriptures suggest there is. And for 30 days after that red moon rose into the night sky, the world paused, if only for a moment, to think about that possibility. And perhaps that is the most powerful part of the story. Not fear, not speculation, but awareness.
because sometimes the greatest purpose of a sign is not to reveal the future, but to awaken the present.
As the final days after the blood moon quietly passed, something subtle had shifted in the way many people were thinking. The sky had returned to its normal color. The excitement online had slowed down. News cycles had already moved on to other topics. But for those who spent the last month reflecting on what the ancient scriptures say about signs in the heavens, the conversation had not really ended. In many ways, it had just begun. When ancient prophets wrote about cosmic signs, they were not trying to entertain an audience or create viral moments. They were speaking about awareness, about recognizing that history moves through seasons, and that sometimes the heavens themselves become part of the story. One of the most frequently discussed passages during this time came from the book of the prophet Joel. His words, recorded in the book of Joel, describe a moment when the sun turns dark and the moon appears like blood before a great turning point in history. For centuries, readers have debated exactly what those words mean, but the message surrounding them is surprisingly consistent. Pay attention to the times and remain spiritually awake. The same theme appears again in the visions recorded by John of Patmos in the book of Revelation. His descriptions of heavenly signs, silence in heaven, and unfolding events are written in powerful symbolic language. Yet even there, the purpose of the vision is not to frighten readers. It is to remind them that history is not random. According to the biblical perspective, events on earth and signs in the heavens are part of a larger story that ultimately leads toward justice, renewal, and restoration. During these 30 days after the blood moon, many viewers began to connect these ancient ideas with a much more personal question. If the scriptures encourage people to be ready, what does readiness actually look like? The answer found in many biblical teachings is simple but profound. Readiness is not about predicting exact dates or chasing every sign that appears in the sky. Instead, it is about the condition of the human heart, living with integrity, seeking truth, and remaining aware of the spiritual dimension of life. One teaching that kept appearing in discussions was the well-known parable found in the Gospel of Matthew. In that story, preparation is described through a group of people waiting for an important moment. Some are ready when the time arrives. Others realize too late that they were distracted. The message of the parable is not about fear or punishment. It is about attentiveness, about choosing to live each day with purpose rather than drifting through life without reflection. As the 30th day came to an end, many people realized that the true impact of the blood moon was not the astronomical event itself. After all, lunar eclipses have happened throughout history. What made this moment different was a conversation it sparked. For a brief period of time, millions of people around the world paused to think about ancient prophecies, the meaning of signs in the heavens, and the deeper questions of faith and purpose. In the writings connected to Enoch, the movement of the sun, moon, and stars are described almost like a divine clock, an intricate system reminding humanity that time itself has meaning. Whether one reads those writings historically, symbolically, or spiritually, the message they point toward is similar to the one found throughout Scripture. The universe is not silent. It tells a story to those who are willing to listen. So when people ask what truly happened in the 30 days after blood moon, the answer may be quieter than expected. There were no sudden dramatic events that everyone could point to and say, "This was the moment." Instead, something more subtle occurred. People began asking deeper questions again. They opened ancient texts. They compared prophecy with history. And many began thinking more seriously about the direction of their own lives. Perhaps that is the real reason why the prophets spoke about signs in the heavens, not to create panic or endless speculation, but to awaken curiosity about something greater than the everyday routine. A red moon can capture attention for a single night, but the questions it raises can stay with a person for a lifetime. And as the skies slowly returned to normal and the final days of the month faded into ordinary time, one truth remained clear. The greatest message was never written in the color of the moon. It was written in the invitation that followed. The invitation to watch, to reflect, and to live with awareness of the bigger story unfolding around us.